You have to walk the talk. You have to be authentic as a leader. If you're not doing it, they see that.
It is entirely universal. There's other people who are going through this.
For me, a great leader needs to be able to marry three things: vision, systems, and people.
Welcome to Leadership Moments. If this is your first time, and if you are returning, thank you for your support.
This show is about leaders from all walks of life, leadership tips, and maybe even a little of what you wouldn't expect to help you in leadership.
We would appreciate it if you tell someone else about our podcast as we strive to support all leaders that want to just be better.
Let's get on with the show.
Today, our guest is Grace Gavin. Grace is a catalyst for open and honest communication and effective leadership. As co-founder of No Honesty, she empowers leaders to simplify communication and eliminate organizational gaps. With a diverse background from farm life to executive roles, she brings a wealth of experience to her current role as co-founder and chief of staff. Passionate about inclusivity and the transformative power of openness and honesty, Grace strives to create workplaces where every individual's voice is valued. Today, we're going to talk about how honesty and openness can guide you to be a transformative leader. Let's jump in. Grace, I'm so excited that you're on our show today. You have a very profound story about why honesty and openness is so important to you. And I'd love for you to start there with our listeners to help them understand how you started on this journey about that.
Thank you so much for having me, Stacy. Yeah, it was about 4 years ago, back in, if you remember COVID times, it was already chaos, and my dad went to the hospital with some pains. Didn't know what was going to come out of that. It was July of 2020. Went in, we were there for 12 days. It was my mom and I. They wouldn't really let anybody else in with the COVID restrictions. And I'm one of 8 siblings, so for me to be the one there, it's just that I had the flexibility at the time with work and such. But we went in, we were there for 12 days, and we ended up getting a cancer diagnosis of stage 4 small cell carcinoma. And my dad was a fighter through and through, and he decided he was going to start chemo in the hospital and was going to do all the things to fight it. And so he started the chemo, started going to all the doctor's appointments, taking all the pills and all the things, because he was going to fight it. You know, that's just kind of who he was. And we went through that journey for several months. And I just remember seeing this once giant of a man. My dad was a farmer, and the stereotypical farmer look that you think of, that's what he looked like. And I remember just seeing like this giant of a man start to wither away. And what we didn't talk about, but we all kind of knew, and this is where honesty becomes really important because we were unwilling to say it and unwilling to hear it, is that there was a 3% chance that he made it through that diagnosis, a 3% chance. And so he was going through all of this treatment, feeling terrible, not being able to go out in his tractors. You know, you would have to watch the corn being planted from the porch but we just wouldn't talk about it. I had one conversation with my sister in one of the upper bedrooms in our parents' house at the time, and she said there's a 3% chance. And I hadn't even looked it up. I didn't want to know. I didn't want that level of honesty in my life. I wanted to pretend that everything was going to be fine. And I look back on that and I think about the huge miss that we had as a family, because we ended up having 5 months with my dad from diagnosis to when he passed in December of 2020. And I just think about what could we have done differently with those 5 months if we had been honest with each other, if we had made a different choice. What would it have looked like for him? And I see that as a huge miss and really lost out on some valuable stories. Like there's stories I could have asked my dad and for advice, and just because we were unwilling to acknowledge the honesty, what was really going on, we missed that opportunity. And I don't want anybody else to miss that in their life. Now, if that ends up being a personal reality, like I went through a cancer journey with somebody's loved one, or if it's something really tough going on in your team at work and you're just unwilling to acknowledge the reality of what we're going through, well, there's not an opportunity to fix it or to do anything different. And you're just holding on to something that's not reality. And so I think about that all the time when I think about what kind of leader am I going to show up being. Are we going to face the reality and work on changing it, or are we going to hide away from it and then end up regretting it later?
Yeah, thank you for sharing your story, and I'm so sorry for your loss. I appreciate you telling this story to our listeners, as painful as it may be, because it is so important to be able to have those. And that is it's very emotional, obviously. It's difficult at that time. And I agree, having that honesty, because you want to have that hope. So it's that conflict of hope. And do we really need to talk about this? And I do appreciate how you tied it to, look, this can be in the workplace, you as a leader, which obviously that's most of our listeners, is them leading their teams. And so when you think about, okay, I have hope, I have this honesty that I need to do, and there are times that I know I'm not being honest, like, I think those signs are different for each individual of like, am I really being honest? What are some signs that you've seen maybe with yourself or with other leaders that you've worked with to be able to trigger to say, I might need to pause here and be a little more open? What do you think there?
Yeah, well, I just want to make a quick clarity for the listeners. So everything that we do is based on helping teams be open and honest, and it's looking at it in a different way than what we typically think about. So honesty is being truly and freely yourself, speaking into what you want and how you feel. That's the you side of the conversation, really important. And then we have openness, which is listening without reservation, putting your needs and wants on pause for someone else. So sometimes we mistake openness for thinking like open book, transparency. That's all wrapped up in the honesty side of things. So I just want to get that clarifier out there. But then, man, I think we overcomplicate it a lot of times, Stacey. And so we at No Honesty, I'm trying to make everything simple for people, because as leaders, we got a lot going on and we need to have tools that we can reach pretty automatically. And so when we're talking about what blocks us from being honest, what we call that is fake you. And fake you is the facade we project rather than being 100% honest. And I say let's keep it simple because we all know what fake feels like. But a lot of times we just end up ignoring it, or we don't recognize that it's happening and understanding why. Like, why did I not say exactly what I needed to say? Or why did I only say 10% of my honesty in that meeting when I really think this project we're about to go down the road on is a terrible idea? If you look at that, why was I fake you? Well, was it because the leader of your team is just not willing to be open? Or is it because the last time it didn't work out so well when you spoke up and now there's a fear that you have going on there? There's a lot of different reasons that it comes up for, but keeping it simple, bring it back to, was I fake in that moment? And we know what that feels like, but sometimes we just ignore it.
Yeah, I love that. And thank you for the clarity between the two. I think that's really important. And I love how simple that is, fake you. And because if you think about it, we don't want to be honest with ourselves sometimes that we are being fake, because we tell ourselves these stories of why we're being fake. And so what are some of the things that you have leaders do once they realize, okay, it was a fake you situation?
Yeah. So first off, we got to walk them through recognizing it, because even though it's simple, so we don't have that language necessarily. At least when I'm working with clients, they don't think about it in that way. And then once I end up working with them for a couple months, they're like, yeah, I see it everywhere. So first we got to recognize, where is this happening? From a very broad level, where is this happening in the world? Then more specifically, where is it happening within this company? Even more specifically, within this team. And then where is it happening for you? And then it's about recognizing it in the moment and making a different choice. So that's what it is. Like we talk about, how do I transform and go to being 100% honest all the time? Well, it's not a transformation that kind of strikes you like lightning. It's these micro moments added up over time where I choose, I'm being fake right now. I'm going to make a different choice. And for an example here, I'll give you with my business partner, Ken Bogard. Love him. Awesome guy. He's going 100 miles a minute, if you know a leader like that. And we have a weekly meeting where we go over our biggest challenges. And, he's going 100 miles a minute. So he's checking in before the meeting. He's got 2 different things that we're working on. He says, hey, how's this going? How's this going? And I thought to myself, this is not the best use of our team's time, because we have a weekly meeting where we come and we talk, we give updates on this, and we work through what the next level of the issue is to get it solved. And so I thought to myself, well, am I going to say something because this is bothering me? And I don't think it's the most efficient use of our time, right? Bringing it back to the business case for it. Or am I just going to let it go because I don't want to step into conflict, into confrontation? And anytime you feel that within yourself, there's something there, right? And so I had to make the choice to say, hey, I understand you want to keep things moving, but this is going to be a hindrance, especially as we continue to grow our team. If we're doing these check-ins and we have to come back and focus on this when we have a dedicated time to do that during the week. And I said, that's where I'm at. And he said, okay, I hear you. Here's where I see it differently. He's like, it's just a quick check-in. Like, I understand it's a quick check-in, but sometimes it's not. And sometimes it takes a whole email chain and it's a half hour or whatever it is. He's like, okay, got it. And now we make an adjustment where we're more aligned. And it's as simple as that sometimes. But there are some people out there that are pretty conflict avoidant. And I can say that there are times that I have been that. And so just understanding where is that happening and how can we make a different choice in the next interaction that we have.
Yeah, I love that. It's the voices inside our head, right? So, and that's a constant thing. I know even just sitting in meetings, there's lots of conversations going on in your head versus what's going on in the room and how to respond to things. So, I mean, is it correct to say that if I have a different voice in my head, that's the trigger of are you being honest at the time? Is that fair to say that?
I think it's fair for some people, and this is where the hard part comes in, where we're keeping it simple, but then it depends on the person. So for me, I would say yes. For you, sounds like probably a yes also, but for each person, it takes just a moment of reflection, right? Like that's what I end up doing with my clients a lot of times is taking the pause, the moment for reflection to understand what does this look like for you? Here's the general thing is fake you, but what does it look like specific to you? And when does it happen? Because usually it happens with another specific person. It happens in a pattern, like maybe you're in a process and this goes on, or it happens in a certain place. For some people, it's the holidays as we're recording this now. For some people, they walk back into their family's house and it immediately puts them back into fake you. So there's a lot of different ways that it can come out for each individual, but understanding what it is for you. And then also the really, really, really hard part of this is, so being honest, difficult, right? But I think the other side of communication, being open, is even harder because what's happening if we have all the voices going on in our head is that we're then trying to multitask, right? We're trying to listen to what the person is saying, but also figure out what am I going to say? How do I feel about that? And we don't multitask well as human beings, even though I really wish that the science said differently on that. We're not necessarily great at it. And what suffers there is my ability to listen to the other person in the meeting. And so that's why the definition of openness is really important, is listening without reservation. Reservation, that can be things that you're holding back on. It can be preconceived notions. It can be assumptions, judgments. Reservations looks like a lot of different ways. So putting those aside for a moment and putting your needs and wants on pause for just a moment. I'm not saying you have to make the conversation fully about them. It is an exchange. But for that moment, are we really pausing all of the things going on to fully absorb what that person has to say? And it's really, really hard to do. Most of my clients struggle more with openness than they do with honesty, just human nature in general. But if we can really help somebody else be heard and understand, we're going to get a lot further in the conversation with our collaboration, with understanding where they're at, where we're at, and how we move forward together. And I think it's a real missed opportunity a lot of the times.
Yeah, I love that. And the openness part, I actually I've been reading this book, Range, and there was a quote in there the other day, and it made me think of, because I knew we were coming up to this recording, and it said, to be open is not just to seek and listen, or not just to listen, but also to seek it out and actually be intentional about asking questions, understanding what's going on. And I'd love to get your thoughts on that. Do you feel that that's the case? Is it truly just like when someone's coming to you and you actually pausing and listening, or is it also you trying to be open-minded and seek out those different ideas or thoughts and hearing that person for who they are and where they're at that moment?
I think it's the both and of that, because a lot of times we're not doing that. So we're not really understanding. We're not trying to figure out what it is that they're really saying. And then it becomes this struggle of who can be heard first versus let me just be here to hear. Because I heard this stat a little bit ago that blew my mind, but looking at it, I see it for sure. And that is that we walk throughout our days and we as human beings, each individually, only feel heard 5% of the day. 5%. Isn't that crazy? Yes, I still saying it to you. I cannot believe that that's what it is. So the question is, are you really pausing to hear somebody? And how do you show that, right? It's the both there and being curious of saying, okay, help me understand. Because sometimes what people say the first time is not what they really mean, but they're not used to somebody asking a clarifying question about that, of listening. Okay, so that's what you're saying? No, not quite. This is what I'm saying. And just having that exchange back and forth, man, that gets really exciting to me, because then we're actually engaged, we're fully present. There's a level of trust going on in that conversation that we don't see anywhere else, or we see very rarely, I'll say it that way. And it gets really exciting at that point.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so let's say I'm trying to be more open. As leaders, right, very busy, lots of things going on, personal and professional. You're doing your best to try to clear your head and really listen to the person. What are some tricks of the trade that might help our leaders be more open?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll give you what the practices that we share with our clients. And so if you think about it this way, we've got fake you on the honesty side of things. That's blocking us from being honest. Okay. So what's blocking us from being open? And quite simply, what we call that is the wall. So in your mind, as you're listening to this, I want you to just exactly picture a brick wall going up between you and the next person that you talk to. And that is what is happening every time when we are not open to somebody else. And a lot of times this happens to us unconsciously or subconsciously because we've been doing it for so long, putting up walls to things that we're not open to or not willing to listen to, that we don't even recognize that it's happening anymore. So for certain leaders, it might be because they feel like they're so rushed and busy all the time. Well, that's a wall right there, and your team members feel it. And I bet you they're probably not trying to pause and talk to you because they already know you're so busy, you're going to put up a wall to it, and you might say something like, let's talk about this next week. Well, then it gets to next week, and you're still busy, and you're still running around, and there's still a wall up there. So again, the wall shows up in multiple different ways. The busy one can be really detrimental to teams. And people will ask me all the time, they're like, okay, well, I don't have the time to pause and to listen to everybody. I'm not talking about sitting down and having a full long conversation with somebody every single time. Sometimes that's warranted, it's needed, but sometimes it's as simple as 5 minutes where your eyes are focused on the person, you're open to what they're saying, and then you move on. It's 5 minutes out of the day to help the people on your team be heard, understand where you're going forward. You can do that. You're going to be a transformational leader.
Yeah, I totally agree. And to the point that I've done this when I've led teams, but I've also helped my clients that are leaders as well, that, you get those interruptions all day long. So you might be sitting in your office or walking the hall and you have your mind on something else. And when we do that, if I'm in the middle of something and someone walks into my office or whatever, and they say, hey, do you have a second? I'll be like, I will in just a minute. Let me just get my thought out with what I'm working on. You please stay here while I do it. Let me get my thought out. So whether I'm writing, typing, whatever, and then I can give you my full attention because you deserve that. And I want to be able to do that. And that in itself is very powerful. So now the person knows, hopefully we're increasing our 5% of feeling heard throughout the day with that stat by doing that. But it is about taking that moment. And you're right. Usually it is just a couple minutes of just listening to that person and understanding that can be so powerful later on when you're making other decisions, because now you know more about the people that you're making decisions for throughout the day. So really, really important. I love that.
Yes, exactly. And then the other part of this, which we kind of already talked about, but if you find yourself struggling to be open, a great little tool is just be curious. Ask more questions. What made you think that? Where's your head at on this is great. And then something else to watch out for as we're talking about the interruptions in the day is that if you are jumping in and interrupting your people, you are no longer being open. You're cutting off their opportunity for honesty. And I think we have to think about this a lot of times in terms of ourself to really understand what we're doing to other people. But how do you feel when somebody else interrupts you immediately? You don't finish your thought. And now that's your boss doing that to you? Yikes. That doesn't feel great. I don't feel like I'm really heard. I feel like I'm part of this team. And so then I'm going to start disengaging. And then we start to see the problems around retention and attracting the best people, which that is a whole rant that I could go into. But just pause for a second. If you feel yourself wanting to jump in and interrupt, can you put a break in between that? Can you put a pause and just say, oh, let me get back to being open? Because these are skills that we're helping people build, really. I'm not expecting any of the listeners to be perfect at this right after listening to this podcast. It's about continuing to build those skills and being on the journey of working towards being more open and being more honest, because you can do it. When I first started out in this work and doing all the research, oh, Stacey, I was like, uh-oh, I am not good at this. And going through it and having to be in my brain for a moment and saying, whoops, not being open. Let me come back to this conversation here. And that's how you do it. It's not, I don't want people to make this more difficult on themselves than they have to be. It's about being better every single conversation than the one you were in last.
And that's about being honest with yourself on where you are with openness. So, it's not to like put the pun behind it, but it's true that it's like, oh, I really, you know what? I didn't hear that last sentence that person said. And should I be honest right now and say, you know what? My mind was elsewhere. Do you mind repeating what you just said? And I think that that's okay, that we need to be able to be honest and say that as leaders. It's so important. And I love the stay curious. So I am a learner through and through. And when I find that people are talking about something that I might not like, it might be a topic that I really just want to shy away from, I always say, what can I learn here? What questions do I need to ask that I can learn? So maybe I can try to be more open about it. I can try to understand where this person's coming from. And so the stay curious is so, so important. I love that piece.
Yeah, absolutely. It's anytime you feel resistance, whether that's resistance in yourself or in the other person, where they feel defensive or you feel defensive, the best way to break that down is get curious.
Yeah. And sometimes I would say it's not even, you're right about being defensive, but sometimes it's like, I don't know if I have the energy for that right now, right? Like you think about all the things that are going on with the leaders and they're like, one more thing I got to deal with, right? And yeah, that's your job as a leader. So now if you can't be open during that time, then be honest with the person and say, you know what? Can we have this conversation in an hour, tomorrow, later, right? Because my mind is on something else and I want to make sure that I give you the time that you deserve. And I think that's one thing that leaders hesitate is they feel they need to be ready at the moment that their team needs them. And it's okay if you're not, as long as you're honest with the team, because they're going to see right through you. And like you said, right, they're going to know where you might be interrupting without you realizing. And I always do this trick where I literally put my finger over my mouth because I forget that I have two ears and one mouth for a reason. And sometimes I'm so passionate about what they're talking about and I want to get my point in that I will go like this while they're talking just to try to stop myself from talking to make sure I give them that moment that they deserve. And then I'll put my finger away from my mouth and then be able to say what I want to say. But it's a little trick that I do to stop myself from talking over on top of somebody.
Oh, that is so good. I love that. And yeah, it's exactly it. It's the exchange going back and forth. And so if your honesty in that moment is, I can't have this conversation, we'll figure out when can we do it? When can we schedule that? Because just because it's not the moment for it now, there does need to be an opportunity for it at some point. So exactly right. I love that.
All right. So you've been working with quite a few clients that do this for a while now. Is there an expected time frame if somebody's working on this? I know everyone probably comes in at a certain level, but when does a leader know I'm there? I am honest and I'm open, or do I falter sometimes with what's going on in my life? Tell me what that looks like when somebody's, I'm going to say, succeeding at being like this.
I really hate to say this, but it's a continuing journey. And so I think when you're succeeding at it is when you're recognizing how often you're not succeeding at it. And that's when, as leaders, we tend to be the ones who are hardest on ourselves. I could have done better. I could have done that better. And I think when you start to recognize, oh, I could have been more honest there, I could have been more open to my team member in that moment, I think that's when you're definitely at the higher levels of openness and honesty. And I would encourage the leaders who get to that point to, just have a little grace for themselves. It's okay. We're not going to get it perfect. There are different circumstances. We have a new team member join, or there's a really tough project, all of these things going on. And so we have an assessment, our Pursuit of Honesty assessment, that tracks the percentage of your ability to be open and honest. And so it's not like the Enneagram or Kolbe, if you've ever heard of that one. You don't get your results and have those be your results for ever and ever and ever, right? Because these are skills that we're building. And so we recommend that people take it every 6 months just to understand where they're at, because circumstances in our life will change. But that's a great way to put numbers to it to help understand that a little bit better for those that need the numeric value of things. But it's recognizing and coming into each conversation, am I being the most honest I can be? Am I being the most open that I can be? Because there are sometimes circumstances that hurt our ability to be that. And then are we recognizing that and moving towards more openness and more honesty again? And it's just the recognition of it at first. It's like, am I doing this? Where can I be doing this better? Because even I have been doing this for years and years and years, Stacy, there's still opportunities where I'm like, oh, I need to step up. I need to be honest here. Like the story that I shared about the meetings, that happened a couple weeks ago, right? And it's just like fine tuning, getting deeper into it, because what happens is that when I'm working with clients, they'll consciously realize where fake you is happening and where the wall is happening. They've never thought about in those terms. So they can pretty clearly call up when that's happening. And then I'll see them, depending on when we're doing the workshops, but typically 6 months later, we're going through that exercise again. And it's harder for them to figure out where that's happening. Like, I'm recognizing where it's happening now. So I'm stopping it in the moment, or I'm making a different change in the moment. And that's where it gets really exciting. It's like, oh, we find less and less spaces where this is happening. And then what can happen sometimes is, all right, we've got all the conscious ones recognized. We've gotten rid of those. Now it's the subconscious ones that we're pulling up more and more. And so it's a continuous journey. That's what it means to be human, is that we're continually trying to better ourselves, better the world around us. And it's not some fixed destination by any means, because just like when you're working the muscles in the gym and you stop, they atrophy.
So I'm actually glad you said that, and that's why I asked the question. I was hoping you were going to say it's a continuous thing, because so often, I know even people like myself, I love checking the box. And so I'm like, oh, okay, I'm going to take this on. I'm going to become honest. I'm going to become open. So when am I done, right? And the fact is, you're never done. It is a continuous thing. And I love how you brought up, like you said, we're recording this during the holiday season, which means you tend to be with family. And sometimes that can be tense for some people, and you start acting differently around some people. And so it's a great time to think about that. And that's only certain times of the year that happens. So you have to continuously work at that, and especially with teams and culture. And that kind of leads me to my next question, which is, if I work in a culture that is not transparent and not honest, how do I as a leader feel safe? I'm going to use that word safe. Start being honest myself, so I can be that transformative leader in that type of environment.
Oh, that is so tough, because I get these questions from individuals sometimes where they're like, I would love to work with you, Grace, but my leadership would never do this. This is not the kind of culture that we have. And so if that is the case for you, number one, that sucks. I'm really sorry. Let's take a moment to recognize that. It's a tough spot to be in. But then the question becomes, what can you do? And we don't want to take a sledgehammer to the culture, because that's going to be really disruptive for people, and that's going to break down trust a lot faster, even as we're trying to be open and honest, which builds trust. So we're not taking it with a sledgehammer, but what are the small ways that you can start this just within your own team, or maybe within a coworker of yours, and then we're building upon it, right? We're talking about it being a journey over time. How can we put in those micro moments of the trust of being open and honest to build towards a better culture and understanding that? And sometimes I find that when leaders ask me this, there's one of two things going on. Number one, either they're going to have to leave that team or that organization because there's not the willingness to do the work or the willingness to try to be open and honest. And that's one, and that's a really tough spot to be in. So question that for yourself. Is that your reality? Or number two, and what I see happening a lot more, is that teams just aren't clear on what it means to be open and honest. And we tend to fear what we don't understand. And so is it the chance that your team just needs some education around it? They need to know what it means to be open and honest because they haven't considered this. This isn't something that's necessarily taught in schools or in college. They don't have a class on being open and honest and how do we do that necessarily. And so sometimes it just takes the education of the team. And one way that you can start to do this is one of our practices called the agreement. So the agreement is a simple, powerful script that I teach clients, and I'll give it to the listeners here in just a second. But we teach clients this because this is a way to kickstart real communication in a relationship where you haven't had it, or even better, if you're starting out a new relationship and having it, because what it does is creates boundaries and expectations around the kind of communication that you want to have with this individual to start off or going forward. And so quite simply, here's the agreement. Will you agree with me on how we're going to communicate? I want you to be 100% honest, meaning I want you to be truly and freely yourself, speaking into what you want and how you feel. And I promise I will be 100% open to it. I will listen without reservation. I will put my needs and wants on pause for you. And in return, I will be honest with you, and I ask that you be completely open to it. That's the whole script. And now, can you imagine if somebody said that to you, what that would do?
I'd be all in. I'd be like, yeah.
Exactly. And hopefully that's the case for whoever you put the agreement in place in within your team. For other people, they might think, oh, this is kind of weird. But it's about it being a living, breathing agreement. So this is not just, great, we have the agreement in place, you and I, Stacey, we're good to go. We're always open and honest with each other. But again, coming back to, am I choosing to be open and honest in this moment? Am I helping the other person do that as well? Sometimes, obviously, Ken and I have the agreement in place, and he'll come to me with a new crazy idea while I'm in the middle of a project, as we're talking about interrupting before. And he'll say the idea, I'm like, I'll brush it off. And I'm not interested in hearing it because I'm focused on this. And he'll come and he'll say, hey, I just need you to be open to this. Or it feels like you have a wall around this. What's going on? And what that does is bringing the agreement back in and saying, we have this agreement in place. What's going on here? And same, I'll go back to him and say, hey, I feel like you're not being fully honest with me. What's going on here? And he's like, yep, you're right. I'm running 100 miles a minute. Let me pause for just a moment and focus on this. And what that does for our relationship over time is it puts that trust in that we can, I'll say, call each other out, but it's really calling each other out with love and making us a better team for that. And so it's a living, breathing agreement coming back to it. I'm not asking you to be perfect on this. I'm not asking the other person. But if you come back to it day in, day out, put those little deposits into the trust bank, if you will. I've hope people have heard that idea there, but putting little deposits into the trust bank is going to help you when something inevitably goes wrong on the team or inevitably goes wrong in that relationship. Because now you know that you can work through it. You can communicate at a really high level to be able to get through it rather than if you had not. So that is one way to just start a micro moment of having real communication. And maybe you do that within your team. Maybe you do that with one teammate, and then you go teammate to teammate to teammate. And that's how we change culture. We don't change culture by putting up new core values on the wall. We do it by living into them day in and day out, because the core values on the wall mean nothing if we're not actually acting according to them.
Yeah, 100%. And it takes time. It's not something you can do overnight. So completely agree with that. Yeah, really great points. All right, there's that sound. It's time for our fun questions. Are you ready for our fun questions?
Oh, I'm ready.
Okay, great. The first one is, if you were an animal, what would you be and why?
Okay, I thought about this a lot, and there are so many different options out there. But what I would be is a cow. And the reason for that is that I grew up on a dairy farm. And so I have this micro strange obsession with cows now, because I don't live on the farm anymore, but I'm still involved in different ways. And so just love it. And cows are they're like big dogs. So my husband is a fruit farmer, had not really had any interaction with cows prior to us being together. And he's like, this thing is huge. It's terrifying. And I told him, it's just a big dog. It's just like a big dog. It's fine. They're friendly. They're nice. And they're great. And he did not believe me for the first little bit there. I'm like, just come stand by it. Just come pet it. And now he gets it. He's like, yep, they are basically a big dog. So it would be a cow for me.
I love that. And I've never heard anybody reference that. And you're right. They can be very intimidating with how large they are. But I love thinking of it that way. It definitely changes my perspective completely. All right, great. The next question is, what is your favorite sound?
Okay, this one might be weird for people, but I am the last of 8 kids. And so that's a lot of chaos going on. Anytime we get together for the holidays, we're talking about this, and it's pretty recent in my mind right now. And so we have close to or about 30 people if you get all of us together between my mom, my siblings, their kids, their significant others. And I just love this sound of the chaos when you walk into the house for whatever holiday it is, because there's inevitably some kid running around. There's an uncle that's yelling at him to slow down, an aunt that's like, get out of the way. We got to get this stuff on the table. And my mom's like, what is happening? Oh, they're finally here. It's chaos. Like that type of movie stereotypical chaos that you see. I'm picturing Home Alone in my mind right now. That's what it's like. And it's so fun because I don't get that every single day with that level of chaos. So I love it.
I love that. And I so agree. Like if anyone is a parent out there or any type of family, like just pausing and listening when you're like not actually in the interaction can be so enlightening and fun and just puts a smile on your face. So absolutely. It's a different one. Yeah, great. Well, Grace, thank you so much for sharing your story, sharing what you've been doing around honesty and openness. And I love the tidbits that you gave our leaders. I know this is going to help them as they move forward, as they try to check out for the fake you and the wall. So really important pieces. And thank you. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
If you enjoyed the show, please go to leadershipmomentspodcast.com to subscribe to the podcast or on your favorite player, as well as follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn.
You can also send us a message on what you like and don't like, or what guest you want us to have on the show.
So until next time.
This is Stacey Castor, and what doesn't challenge you won't change you.
And I'm Tracy Ann Palmer. Be the change you wish to see in the world.